Welcome to the channel, folks. My name's Shane. If you've landed on this video, odds are you've already decided that whatever camera you're shooting with isn't probably cutting it, and you're wondering whether or not you should go for the Sony A7C or the Panasonic GH5M2 when it comes to shooting video. I've been using these both a lot. Now, I actually broke my Panasonic GH5M2. I've had it repaired, so I liked it that much. I wanted to actually get it fixed. So I'm going to compare these in terms of video features, video quality, all the things you should know if you're thinking about buying one or the other. Timestamps will be below. If this video is helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. I appreciate that. Let's get into it. Now, if you're asking why on earth I'm comparing a Sony full frame camera up against the Panasonic Micro Four Thirds camera, it's because in Australia where I live, both of these are exactly the same price. So I thought it would be a fair comparison. Now, I'm going to talk about this from someone who's in front of the camera as well as someone who's mostly behind it. You can make your decision about which one is best for you. Everything you've seen in this video so far has been shot with the Panasonic S5, which is Panasonic's full frame camera. This is using the kit lens, so I'm going to switch over to the Panasonic GH5M2. We'll test out the autofocus, and then we're also going to test it out on the Sony A7C. And now I'm over to the Panasonic GH5M2, testing out face detection autofocus with a fairly unfavorable lens in terms of autofocus performance. This is the Panasonic Leica 12mm f1.4 prime at 1.4 in aperture priority mode, 10-bit 4K, which is one of the advantages over the Sony, but sometimes specs don't matter. It's all about usability, which will be some part of this comparison review coming up. So yeah, this is the kind of results you can get with Micro Four Thirds up against what you just saw before, a full frame camera. The background blur should be nice. Is there much pulsing? I really feel like between this camera, the GH5M2, and the Panasonic S5, I trust the autofocus far more than I ever have. And now we're over to the Sony A7C in face detection auto mode. I'm shooting at 4K 25p in 8-bit because there's no 10-bit at 50p, which is what I was shooting with on the Panasonic. But the advantage of this is you can get far more background blur if you so choose. So this is 2.8, which is the equivalent of the 1.4 on Micro Four Thirds. Now, if I open this up to 1.4, look at this. This is how much background blur you can get, and the autofocus will just work. This is one of the advantages of this system. So if you're doing a lot of talking to the camera like this camera makes a whole lot of sense, and that's the reason why I purchased it. Up next, we're doing a vlogging test. I'm going to start on the Panasonic GH5M2, which has one of the best stabilization systems out there. This and the Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II or 3 both have great stabilization. So if you just want great, stable out of camera footage without having to run it through any type of software, then go for the Panasonic. And I think this is ample background blur. Let me know what you think. If you hold it closer, you're going to get even more background blur. So keep that in mind. I don't think you necessarily need more than this. And now we're over to a vlogging test using the Sony A7C. So you might be thinking, hey, this looks pretty good. Just wait till I start walking. Now, I can't actually see the screen because I'm wearing my sunglasses, but I know from experience this won't look anywhere near as stable. So this basically requires you to use the Catalyst browse software, which isn't a bad idea if you've got the time and a good computer. But just know, unless you're paying the monthly membership option for it, you can't batch export your stabilized clips, which means you have to do them all one at a time. And if you also own a Sony camera that has 10-bit codecs, the free version downsamples it to 8-bit, which kind of defeats the purpose. But for this camera, it will do the job, and it is free, and you can get better stabilization than on the GH5M2, but not straight out of camera. And if your computer's old, that process is going to take a very long time. Oh yeah, did I mention I can't see the screen? Sucks. Up next, we're going to talk about slow motion because both of these cameras have some advantages and disadvantages, but the win goes to the Panasonic overall because it allows you to do 4K 50 or 4K 60 by default, and you can shoot indefinitely with audio, and that's a really cool thing. You get full autofocus, or the autofocus that's available for Panasonic, so I think that's a clear winner. But when we're talking about the HD resolutions, this is where it becomes a bit of a more even match, so to speak. So the Sony on the top here has an S and Q mode, and this allows you to store your favorite slow motion setting and retrieve it simply by going into the S and Q option. This will allow you to get up to 120p in HD with autofocus, but with no sound. Whereas the Panasonic has this slightly convoluted menu system to get slow motion stored on a custom menu button, but you can do it up to 180 frames per second in manual focus only with no audio. So there's some trade-offs there, but in terms of the overall picture quality, if you keep the Panasonic up to about 120, it's going to look great. And the slow motion on the A7C also looks really good. So it's up to you which one you like the best. If you prefer autofocus, go for the Sony. If you don't mind a little bit of manual intervention, I think the Panasonic has the edge. Up next, we're talking about ergonomics. This is really important. If you're going to be holding a camera all day in your hand, you want to make sure that it's comfortable. Now, while the compact nature of the A7C may lend itself in theory to being the most portable camera, I got to tell you, the thing that I like least about it is this grip right here. It is absolutely horrible. I got relatively large hands, so I can actually palm a basketball, right? So being able to not really get my fingers in here comfortably is a huge pain. And the grip is so small on this side here that it just isn't comfortable to carry. Now, you might call that nitpicking, but compared to the Sony or the Olympus or the Panasonic S5, this grip is terrible in comparison. So yeah, not the most comfortable camera. I would have to say that's my biggest nitpick when it comes to using this, is this horrible grip. The second thing that really annoys me about the Sony A7C is this electronic viewfinder. Now, I'm thankful there's one on there, but if you're left-eyed, you're smashing your nose into the back of the camera. This is just something you need to be aware of. If you're using your right eye, there's far less problems, but I'm actually left-handed and I like to use my left eye, which means this is very uncomfortable for me to use. So yeah, it's just a small thing for some people, but I would much rather have this in the center, even if it means building the camera up slightly. Let's talk now about the Flippy screen. Now, I'm glad that Sony have added a Flippy screen, and it is usable just as a reference monitor, as long as you're not wearing polarized sunglasses. There's no touch functionality on the Flippy screen, except for when it comes to touch to focus. That's the only thing this screen will do. So if you're expecting it to be, you know, a fluid experience of using your thumb on the screen mixed with the buttons on the back of the camera, this isn't the right camera for you. The Panasonic is far better in that regard. Let's talk about the ergonomics now on the GH5 Mark II. While this is a slightly heavier camera, the grip is so much better, the heat dissipation is better, and it's far more comfortable, especially if you've got larger hands. Notice how my fingers aren't pressed up against the lens here, so I think that's a huge bonus. Now, when it comes to the Flippy screen, this is infinitely better for a number of different reasons. The touch functionality is better, it's much clearer and brighter to see, it's far easier to see, it's higher resolution. You can navigate all of the menu systems by using the screen or the controls on the back of the camera. So in my opinion, it's a no-brainer if you want the best functionality with lots of function custom buttons on the back and a much better viewfinder that's centered so you don't smash your nose anywhere. The GH5 Mark II is the way to go. Panasonic GH5 Mark II is a much better studio tool, or if you're going to be hooking it up to an external monitor, thanks to that full-size HDMI port. If you're going to be shooting any type of professional work, I would urge you to go for the Panasonic GH5 Mark II because it gives you a sense of redundancy thanks to the 2 SD card slots. This allows you to record simultaneously to both cards at the same time, and if one fails, the other one's there as a backup, or you can set it up so photos go to one SD card and video goes to the other. I think that's actually really cool. The Sony doesn't allow you to do that. It only has one SD card slot. So if you're going to be doing those one-time events, you might want to consider going for the Panasonic. I think just having that sense of redundancy, especially if you're overseas for the first time and you don't want to lose any footage, it makes a whole lot of sense. Now let's talk about the audio preamps. So the great news is both are on par with each other. I don't really see there to be any advantage to the Panasonic nor to the Sony in this regards. Both handle wireless packs fine, and they also work great with shotgun mics. When it comes to monitoring your audio in real time, unfortunately the Sony A7C doesn't have a headphone jack built into it, so that's a bit of a downer, whereas on the Panasonic we get real-time headphone monitoring. Now the good news is, even though the Sony doesn't have it, packs like the Blink 500 Pro, this wireless pack I'm using right now, gives you the option, if you're behind the camera, to monitor in real-time audio using the headphone socket on the back of the pack. So that's a real bonus right there. So if you don't have a solution like that that has real-time audio monitoring, you're out of luck. If low light performance is a huge consideration, then go for the Sony A7C. The larger sensor gives you better low light performance, and mixed with that autofocus, you're going to get far more repeatable and reliable autofocus versus the contrast detection system on the GH5 Mark II. Now, interestingly enough, you can still get good low light results with micro four thirds in low light, but the autofocus really starts to struggle. So with those two things said, the A7C is the obvious choice. So at the end of the day, should you buy the Sony A7C or the Panasonic GH5 Mark II? I really think it depends on what kind of shooting style you're involved in. If you're doing shots like this where you're relying heavily on autofocus, it's a no-brainer, go for the Sony A7C. The autofocus system fills you with confidence and it responds beautifully, even at the expense of not having 4K 60 or any 10-bit codecs. Now, some people can't live without that, and if that's you, then go for the Panasonic GH5 Mark II. And the reason why is you can easily just lock it off onto manual focus once it finds your face if you're standing in front of it, and then you're good to go as well if you don't want any type of hesitation. Manual focus is still the best way to go. Even the Sony autofocus can let you down sometimes if you're holding products up to the lens. It can sometimes second guess itself, but it's far better generally, especially with eye autofocus. If you're familiar with a lot of YouTube channels, a lot of channels dismiss Micro Four Thirds as a viable option because they don't think it's professional enough. There's so many pro features crammed into the GH5 Mark II, the GH5S, or the original GH5 that you don't find on a lot of modern cameras. It takes getting something like the Sony A7S III or the FX3 to get a lot of the features that were available on the GH5 back in the day. They did take it to the next level, but it's taken them so long. So the GH5 Mark II has far more features than a lot of people give it credit for. And in terms of just codecs, resolutions, frame rates, all that kind of stuff, it's leagues ahead of the A7C. Looking back at the footage shot with the GH5 Mark II and the Sony A7C, the GH5 Mark II without any post-production almost looked as good as the Sony A7C after I ran it through the Catalyst software. The Catalyst software is fantastic and you'll get gimbal-like results at the expense of a crop in your image and the time it takes to output those files. So for vloggers, the GH5 Mark II is a no-brainer, and being able to get much smaller lenses is a really big deal. Thanks for watching, folks. My name's Shane. I've tried to cover everything that I've learned about both of these cameras without getting too caught up with the specs. The specs don't always mean great quality, and sometimes 8-bit can look better with a nice lens over 10-bit with a crap lens. There's all of these other factors, so I thought I'd just give you my opinion on my thoughts about owning and purchasing both of these cameras. So this video is not sponsored, by the way, so if you did enjoy it, please leave a thumbs up, all that kind of stuff. I appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, I'll link up to a playlist here. You can check out some of my camera reviews and tutorials. Thanks again. Catch you soon. See ya.